Certainly the last few years as I've been a more senior leader, that's my job is to create the conditions by getting the right talent and teams together to be able to perform.
Yes. Yes, that's so well said. And I never reference back to the MBA program except that you and I met there. So I
Yeah.
remember in the organizational behavior classes, the professors saying something like, you think everything you need to know right now is in finance and decision science, but it's actually all here. And everybody made fun of them, and they were totally right. They were
Yes.
completely right.
Hello, I'm Shannon Huffman Polson. Welcome to Facing the Wind, Season 2 of The Grit Factor. At the Grit Institute, our mission is to build courageous leaders for a better world. We're going deep into each part of the Grit triad with candid conversations and lessons from those who have been there and are willing to share ways they've learned to own your past, deeply engage in the present, and look to the future for exceptional impact. In this second season, I'm talking to leaders and world-class performers who have figured out how to best contribute in the world under the most demanding conditions, as well as experts who will move you closer to your goals. Their stories and what they've learned will help you lead a better world. Find out more about the Grit Institute at thegritinstitute.com, with online courses taking you deep into grit and resilience, leadership and purpose, and storytelling, as well as tailored corporate solutions for your organization. Let's take off. I can't wait for you to join this conversation with veteran leader turned businesswoman, Tina Morris. Tina is a proven leader with 20 plus years leading global financial businesses and teams. Most recently at S&P Global as the COO of the $3 billion ratings division. Prior to that, she led the global business lines of U.S. public finance and global structured finance. Tina led teams at S&P through times of unprecedented business growth and crisis, from the credit crisis to massive regulatory change to significant margin expansion. Throughout these experiences, Tina transformed S&P's capabilities, enabling the business to overcome generational crises and thrive. Tina's passion lies with building and leading teams, where she takes great pride in mentoring and elevating her team members. These are values that Tina learned early on while attending West Point and serving as a captain in the United States Army. Tina and I were classmates at the Tuck School at Dartmouth, and I'm proud to call her a friend.
Tina, thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us on the Grit Factor.
I'm so happy to be here, Shannon.
It's great to see you always. And I know you have such incredible stories from, I think, 30 years, 35 years of experience in so many different facets of your life. And I wondered if you would kick us off with kind of where it all began, maybe starting around college.
Sure. So probably the biggest decision that sort of launched me into kind of Army world and military world was the decision to go to West Point.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget, I was, kind of that senior in high school, and I was sitting on the family room floor with my dad and my mom, and I was like breaking down. I was like, I don't know if I should go to West Point. I don't know if I should go into the Army. And they were leaving the decision all up to me, and I thought that was amazing because my parents sort of empowered the decision to me. And I sat there and I said, I want the challenge, and I don't ever want to regret and wonder if I could have done it and could have been part of that great legacy of people who've gone before in the military and at West Point.
And you had a family history there as well, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And my dad had gone, but so interesting. And this is why I go back to, parents and family. They really supported me in the decision, but
Right.
didn't impress their own biases or views. Like they let it be my decision. And later on at West Point and in the Army, I always felt the people who were happiest and most fulfilled in their service were those that were there because they wanted to be, and
Yes.
not because their parents made them go or their friends or status or any other reason. I mean, I think it goes back to certainly a lifelong learning that I've had, that you have to make decisions around your own personal passion,
Yes.
and that will drive success and ultimate purpose.
Sure. What were some of the things that, because when you go to West Point, when you go to college, that's a pretty impressionable age for all of us. And so when you take that on to go to an academy, that is in ways you don't even know when you're 18 years old, right? That's going to be something that will teach you things for the rest of your life. What
Mm,
stays with you that you can specifically attribute to West Point, do you think?
mm. So I always felt like there was a little bit of DNA that brought me to West Point. So some of the things about West Point certainly attracted me. And then just sort of they became, larger than life because
Sure.
West Point is first off all about teamwork. So, I grew up playing soccer. I grew up in sports. So teamwork was just, how I grew up. But West Point, it takes it to a whole new level. I mean, you're just not successful as an individual. And in fact, you fail if you try to come at things as an individual. So just really became, it just brought it to an advanced level, the
Yeah.
teamwork topic for me. So that was the first one. I mean, the second one was, I've always been a hard worker, but at West Point, like you work hard and you see results. It's definitely a place where you have to, put the time, roll up the sleeves on all the different aspects of life, academic, military, physical. So I love that. And I have to say the third, would have been, just that opportunity to bring in, learning all the time. And, something that I have found even as a leader in my corporate environment, just that learning agility and always be curious and
Yes.
always want to learn new things. And for me, the military side of West Point was so interesting and new.
Yes.
But just that sort of curiosity of learning and then being able to sort of practice what you're learning. So those are just a few key highlights. But at the end of the day, what is most powerful for me, at age 50 about West Point were the relationships and the friendships that
Yes.
really came out of that teamwork that you had at West Point. And you probably also feel that way from your time in the military. It just, they're like family, the trust and the bond that you have with these folks.
Yes, yes. No, that's so well said. And that connection for both teamwork and working together and finding ways to work together, which is not always easy, right? Is a really important lesson. But I love also that you brought up this idea of curiosity and lifelong learning, because I think as technology continues
Mhm.
to proliferate, that certainly comes up as one of the most important traits for people to cultivate, right? In a world where you're not going to be doing the same thing in 5 years as you're doing today, or you're certainly not going to be doing it in the same way, for sure.
Right. Absolutely. And it's interesting because I know, many people have different biases about, people who, spend a lot of time in the military, but I actually think you have to be really open-minded and curious and always willing to adapt and learn in the military to be successful, because the conditions are constantly changing and you have to understand them and be willing to do something different.
Right. And be creative, right? It's both
Yeah.
being able to be adaptable, but then find creative solutions. I feel like there's so many great examples that are fun, actually, really to relate to others when they ask, because there's this assumption sometimes that people that come from the military are very, very stuck in their ways, right? Or constrained to a certain path, and explain, the plan is really important, and the idea that the plan doesn't survive first contact. So you better be able to be
Yes,
creative is exactly what you learn,
absolutely.
right?
Well, one of my favorite stories, and I tell this all the time to people in corporate America because I always, it would always bother me when people felt like they were indispensable. It's like they couldn't go on vacation and not check their email. I'm like,
Right.
well, actually, in the military, one of my favorite experiences when I think I was out at JRTC or NTC, the training centers,
Yeah.
and they killed me as the platoon leader off like 15 minutes into the major exercise or mission.
Right.
And they made me sit on the side of the road
Wow.
and watch how my platoon operated with me dead. And so it was the ability that I had to train my team to
Yes.
execute without me. And that said a lot for my ability to train others
Exactly.
and develop leaders.
That's
And so
right.
I always would love to tell that story because I'm like, no, that was how they judged my leadership ability was how well I trained others and got them ready to do my job.
Exactly. Exactly. I just finished a nonprofit project that I've been working on for almost 6 years, and it's been a completely enormous lift personally and all of my free time. And I
Mm,
turned it over to the new board chair. This is all, again, board work, right? And he's excellent. He's the perfect person for the next phase of the job. And I had so many people come up and say, isn't it hard to do this? Like, isn't it hard to let this go? And I was like, no, because if I've done a good job, then they don't need me. And they haven't really needed me for the last 6 to 9 months, because this has been a progressive work of making sure that the right people are on the team and that they're doing those jobs. And so by the time I leave, it should just be seamless, right? That's what a leader does, is you
Yeah.
bring people, you make yourself actually dispensable in a sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
You work yourself out of a
Absolutely.
job. That's the best way to do
Yes.
it.
It is, and it's such a hard one. And I know some of the hardest times in the army were when I had to, leave platoons or companies. And it is, most know in the army, you're leaving every 2 or 3 years and going into new
Right.
roles. And I also think this contributes to sort of your adaptability.
Yes.
But I remember particularly I was leaving one organization and we'd done really well, and we were a very tight platoon. And my platoon sergeant said to me, "Oh, ma'am, don't worry about it. We will all have the same set of memories of what it felt like to be on this great team. And we will take
Wow.
those with us, and they will never leave us." And I've like always thought about that at different points that I've transitioned in corporate life as well. That is like, that is what makes us up, is those
Yes.
memories and experiences. And we have them our whole lives. Even though we're not going to be with that same group, we have the
Yes.
memories. And one time I called it sort of the magic. You remember the magic of being on a great team. And
Right.
then for the rest of your time, you strive to create those same conditions of being on the magic of a great team.
Yes.
So,
Yes. That's so nicely said. So you spent about 10 years in uniform, I think. Is that
mhm.
right? As a military
Well,
police
between
officer?
West Point and then military police was about 7 years. So West Point 4 years, and then 7 years in the military police corps.
Okay, that's right. Okay, that's right. And then we met at business school at the Tuck School at Dartmouth, which was
Mhm.
a huge gift and continues
Yeah.
to be a gift. And then
Yeah.
you've gone and you've been at S&P for 19 years, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, I
so
have.
that's amazing. So, and currently as a COO, I think,
Mhm.
in the last 4 years. So, talk a little bit maybe about the time in uniform prior to transitioning through the MBA program, and you've already mentioned a couple of the lessons. But one of the things I think sometimes people think is that somebody like you is just able to take everything on without any problem, and it just rolls off her back. Was there ever a time that something didn't just roll off your back? Like maybe something was really, really challenging. And I had talked to someone recently and said, yeah, there's times you go in the closet and you cry, and
Yeah.
everyone does that. What was that for you, and how did you find your way through that?
Wow, that's really it's a great question. And I would say usually my most challenging moments, are hardest moments in its sort of work life,
Yeah.
post-military, are really about how I can bring my best self to supporting teams. And that intersection of how you support the team, but also drive results and hold people accountable.
Yes.
And that's a really hard balance,
For
when
sure.
you're trying to support and empower teams, but at the same time, you have a responsibility to the company to
Yes.
deliver on results. And
That's right.
so, that's probably where I've struggled the most as a leader, is how to balance that style, and what tools do I use as a leader to inspire and empower people. But then if they're not able, to get the results that the company needs,
Sure.
how do you also help them with their performance, or help performance management? So that's been something that, has been an interesting one for me, on finding that, kind of intersection. And some of it, frankly, becomes, do you have the right talent? Did you make the right hiring decision to begin with?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and sometimes what I have learned the hard way is, you just have to make hard decisions if you
Yeah.
haven't made the right talent calls up front.
Yes, yes, that is incredibly well said. I feel like that's true whether you're looking at the military, where you have fewer options in that regard, but certainly in the corporate space and even in the nonprofit space, it really is about having the right people on the right seats of the bus, right? Jim Collins had it
It
right
is.
from the very beginning.
I know. And I I could sit here and talk about, I've had a lot of different opportunities where I've run big operations and the technical, and I've run, both big physical operations, like when Hurricane Sandy hit New York and we had to move our company. And I've helped a lot with return to office with COVID. But for those technical operational activities, I find for some reason, because they're less emotional,
Sure.
that, it's for me, because I have a very operational mindset, I can handle those situations much more effectively. For me, the
Yes.
harder situations are the ones that are more emotional around people,
Yes.
and how you're supporting them and how you're bringing them together. Because every day you want people to love coming to work every day and to
Right.
be engaged and to be there to support the company mission. And when there's distress within that because of the challenges of performance and results, and then kind of how the team's operating, those to me are the hardest cases. And
For sure.
certainly the last few years, as I've been a more senior leader, that's my job, is to create the conditions by getting the right talent and teams together to be able to perform.
Yes. Yes, that's so well said. And I never reference back to the MBA program except that you and I met there. So I
Yeah.
remember in the organizational behavior classes, the professors saying something like, you think everything you need to know right now is in finance and decision science, but it's actually all here. And everybody made fun of them, and they were totally right. They were
Yes,
completely right.
they
Yeah,
were. They
it's
were.
what a
And
hard thing is at any level, right?
yes. And you probably also remember in the army, like people would say you spend 90% of your time with the challenging people and cases. And
Yes,
it's similar that unfortunately, it is when you have some of those challenges within team dynamics and people dynamics that can become more time consuming for you, and
right.
being able to focus on some of the more technical operational issues or business issues. So
Sure,
um,
sure.
but anyway, that those are some things that are top of mind for me. But I've been very grateful and blessed to have so many different experiences at S&P through the credit crisis. I mean, there were a lot of challenging moments.
Right.
But I always found, something that was always, and I think I learned it in the military, but there's two things that I learned very early on: listen and ask a lot of questions. Like we talked about,
Yes,
be curious, take in as
yes.
much information as you can, from people, from stakeholders, from customers, from people using the systems and tools. Like learn as much as you can, and then gather other data that helps you, and then form hypotheses, and then just start going, try to solve the problem. Try to
Sure.
figure it out, and just keep using data and input and feedback to help you refine your set of hypotheses, your plan, your strategy. And then to me, the special sauce is just that combination of, real, actual data you can use, whether it be market data or
Sure.
something very specific and real and tangible, with experiential data from whether it be internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and putting it together, and then developing a point of view as a leader, and
Yes.
communicating well around it.
It's so interesting. I just corresponded with Marsh Carter. Do you know of Marsh Carter? He's a two-time Purple Heart winner and Marine teaches at MIT Sloan. He ran State Bank for I think at least 10 years and was at another bank before that. And he's I think probably in his late 80s now. And he always writes me back when I send out my newsletter, which I love. And he just sent me his top 4 points for CEOs, which you will
Oh.
love because and he says he learned this in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. That says these are the things that have pulled all the way through. And the first one was decisiveness, the ability to make a decision, and the second one was communication around that decision. And so
Mm,
I love that you just brought that up. You and Marsh would be very much aligned in your experience
yes.
and what you have found that works.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, Shannon, because it is something you learn in the military. Because at what age, 23, when you're leading a platoon, everyone's looking to you. It is
Yes,
part of how they train leaders, is forcing them to be decisive at a young age.
that's right.
And I think when we going back to talking about planning, I mean, you get as much information as you can, and then there's a point in time where you have to set the plan with the
Yes,
information you have. And I think there was always that sort of that percentage of time of how much time you plan as a leader, and then how much time you give your teams to plan. Something
exactly.
like 2/3, 1/3, or something like that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. One third,
um,
2/3 rule, right?
yeah, I know, but it's really important. And I think, taking in as much as you can, synthesizing it, and then being like, okay, this is my point of view on this.
That's
And
right.
being decisive about it is definitely a differentiator for folks in the corporate world.
Yes.
And then, there's also something special to that, and it's courage.
Yes.
And I think folks who come out of a military set of experiences, they have a different type of courage around decision making,
Yes.
and they trust themselves.
Yes. I love that you brought that up. I feel like there's so many different things that I want to ask you, but I know our time is getting short. So one of the things around courage, because I think this is so relevant in our broader cultural and political landscape right now, is the need for courage around ethical and moral decisions. What do we do
Mhm.
about that? I mean, I feel like that is something where there isn't anybody that has the corner on the market on it, right? I mean, there's people making poor decisions in and out of uniform and in and out of politics and in and out of
Mhm.
every realm. What do we do about getting back to a place of respect and where we are basing our decisions on moral and ethical principles?
Mhm. It's a very strange time and hard time. And, I think about like the advice I give my kids, and I think that you have to keep guided by your own personal values.
Yes,
And, if we all go back to that, I think most people in this country grow up with the same set of values around, trust, kindness, treat other people with respect.
right.
And if everyone went back to some of that simpleness of those values,
Yeah,
the world would be different right now. So that's what I go back to the
love that.
simple and the sort of control what you can control,
Sure.
and talk about it that way. And everyone did that, then, it would be the
Right.
domino effect.
Right.
I sometimes spin when I sort of let the broader context get me down, and I say, well, sometimes the best way I handle things is what can I control, and I can control me, my own actions, my own values, and how I live up to my own values, and how I influence my kids and
Right.
those around me with it.
Yeah, I mean the people that you're working with as well, right? Everyone has the opportunity to lead in that way if we step up and have the courage to do it,
Absolutely.
which I do think is a bit of a mandate at the moment that we need to
Yeah.
all step up and be courageous
Well,
in that way.
the hard thing is, and the one thing I will say that I think is really tough is, within that for me, it's, how do you hold yourself accountable for your behaviors and others? And I think
Yes.
that's what's had me a little concerned, is that there's a little bit of a lack of accountability around behavior,
Yes.
and that's probably the hardest part about it, and that takes courage right now as a leader to say, no, I am going to hold you accountable for that.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's incredibly important. Accountability
Yeah.
is part of what makes everything work, right?
Yes. Yes.
You had mentioned the work that you did as part of the return to office, and I think this
Mhm.
is still so relevant and will continue to be relevant for a very long time as companies are trying to figure out how to make it all work. I just saw that REI is selling back this huge complex that they were all getting ready to move into in Seattle because people aren't coming back to work. I mean, there's some really big decisions that are financial decisions and human resource
Yeah.
decisions that are, and frankly, strategy decisions that are all related to those things. Where do you see things evolving and how do companies do that well with their employees?
It's a very hard one. I have seen us struggle with it. And I was very involved with return to office for a while, with S&P. Um, I would just say my personal view around it is, I think there's a certain amount of presence that really helps an organization and its culture.
Yes.
And exactly what that is and how that feels, we have to figure that out still. And every company's gonna be a little different based on their customers and their product lines. But I think it's important. I think there needs to be some point of a moment where there's in-person connection for teams.
Right.
It could be once a month, like community consulting firms have the sort of team days where people come in once a month. It could be quarterly if teams are really dispersed. But I firmly believe that the culture needs some type of presence, and leaders need to role model around it and be clear on why it's important.
Sure. And when you are not in the office together, how did you find it to be effective to stay connected with your team?
Oh, I will say that I think video is amazing. I think all the different tools we have now are just fantastic. I do believe, though, that so for me in particular is because we had such strong connections, because we'd
Sure.
spent so many times, so many years working together, that connection was there.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
helped us move into a very virtual environment. But I just think you have to be consistent with it and
Right.
regular with it and expect the video presence from folks when you want to talk.
Yes.
But I think it's a two-way street, and I think it's trusting each other, using the tools that you have, and then having a really good rhythm
Yeah.
so that it is predictable and you have a very good flow in how you keep communication and trust up.
That's excellent advice, actually, and sometimes hard to follow in the chaos of what happens. Yes, that's
And
right.
then you have to have fun. I mean, I'm sure most big companies did things like we did where, you know, maybe it's silly, but like, and we had like Halloween, Zooms where people were in great costumes. But you know what? It was memorable and people jumped on and they connected over it. And
Yeah.
so, there's some things that are fun that cause people to have a little extra connection that's outside of their work conversation. You can do all that virtually too. It's not quite the same as going to an in-person Halloween party, but
Sure.
you know,
It's something. That's right.
it's something
It's something.
exactly.
And you're trying, you're making the effort, right?
That's right.
Yes. I remember
That's
doing a
right.
Christmas trivia thing on Zoom with the board for the library, and it was fine, right? And somebody just said, "I can't believe you put this together." So I was like, "Well, you know what? At least people see that we're we're
That
attempting."
you're trying, right. And what I will say is for global organizations that
Yes.
teams are dispersed anyway, who wouldn't like I have, teams in Australia, teams in Singapore, teams in Hong Kong. I didn't have a lot of time with them anyway in person. This
Sure.
actually closed the world a bit, connected the world more closely. So teams that I didn't see as often because they weren't sitting in New York where I was,
Yes.
all of a sudden I had a different relationship with them
Right.
because I was more virtual and I wasn't always sitting in an office or sitting on a train getting to an office. So there are a lot
Yes.
of benefits for the global network in a broader, when you start to think about it more broadly, is that teams that weren't connecting as much because of the time zones, they really you have more tightly connected all of that.
That is a wonderful benefit that came from all
Mhm.
of this,
Yeah.
despite everything that we have to figure out as a result. Well, what you have two daughters. You've been a woman in a mostly male environment for your entire career. What parting words of wisdom as we come to a close do you
Mm.
have for people who are still struggling in environments like that that might still not be totally receptive
Mm.
or sometimes be openly antagonistic?
Well, I will just tell you that my 10-year-old daughter, about a year ago, we're Catholic, and she came out of church and she said, the priest told me, or CCD, she goes, the priest told me that I couldn't be a priest because I'm a woman. Why can't I be a priest? And I'm not going to sit here and challenge the Catholic Church here right now. But what I love is that her courage and her
Yes.
just her freshness of asking that question. And so I think
Yes.
my answer to that question would be, don't lose that spirit. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do something or keep you down from doing something that you want to try and do. And I get inspired every day by women like the women who did first women in ranger school. And I would just say, don't let it slow you down.
Yeah.
Just keep at it. Just
Tina,
keep at it.
I have to tell you, because we're Episcopalian, at the end of church a couple of years ago, our bishop was visiting, who happens to be a woman, and our children met her, and they looked very surprised, and she looked down at my son and she said, "Don't worry, boys can be bishops too." So there we go. That's a great way to end
There
on
we
all of this.
go.
Yeah. So keep the spirit, no matter who you are or where you are,
Exactly.
and thank you for all that you've done and the way that you show up in the world and this time together. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shannon. This was lovely. I loved it.
That's Facing the Wind, Season 2 of The Grit Factor. Thank you for being here. As always, it's great to have you listening in. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you subscribe, leave us a review, and share with a friend? And make sure to pick up your own copy of The Grit Factor for candid stories and lessons from leaders in the vanguards of their fields. If you have a question you'd like to ask, send me a voicemail through the link at my website at thegritinstitute.com/podcast. See you next week.